Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you've connected from. Thank you so much for making the time to attend this webinar. My name is Lasha, and I'm an e-learning manager with Lionbridge. And today, we're going to be exploring how to create global content and how to ensure your content is localization friendly. You might find it interesting to note the definition of the word global. The Collins Dictionary defines global as an adjective to describe something that happens in all parts of the world or affects all parts of the world. The Oxford Dictionary puts it in a little more concise manner, where it defines global as covering or affecting the whole world. I'm sure you understand where we're going with this. Can something truly be created in such a way that it affects or impacts the whole world in the same way as it was intended for the original target audience? I'll repeat that. Can something truly be created in such a way that it affects or impacts the whole world in the same way as it was intended for the original target audience? I know music does that. Sometimes facial expressions too. But can the same be achieved through imagery and words? Why don't you tell me by the end of this webinar? In today's session, we will look at what localization means, what the difference between localization and internationalization is. We will look at some examples of localized content, both that did well and some blunders too. We will then skim through some localization standards and talk about creating a good, strong global content strategy for all your localization needs. To put it in simple terms, localization or L10N is when a piece of content is converted to suit another country or audience. There are two key points here: accessibility and appeal or familiarity. Localization means to make your content accessible and appealing to all locales. If you work with any kind of content, be it to inform, to influence, or connect with your audiences, or even to teach or train in multiple countries and languages, you already know that localization is a huge part of being relevant in the market today, especially with how the pandemic has changed everything we do and how we consume content. Because it's easy to waste a lot of resources creating, managing, and sharing content that has no impact, or worse, has a detrimental effect because it's poorly targeted or badly written, shoddily translated, or not localized well. Before we dive deeper, it is important to understand the difference between localization and internationalization. Localization means adapting to meet the language, cultural, and other requirements of a specific target market or a locale. Internationalization consists of adapting the product or service and its design so that it is easy to localize. Don't worry, we'll come to examples for these. Now let's throw in translation into the mix. Translation takes content in one language and renders it to another. The objective here is to convey a near equivalent or closest meaning. I once sent a few files over to a Chinese client. 20 minutes later, I received an email saying, "Thank you for sharing the files, Lasha. I showed them to my boss and she was aroused." True story. My assumption is he used direct translation for the word excited, which was translated as aroused. Now, the term localization is often used as a synonym for translation, which it is not. Localization requires a complete rehaul of the core logic, visual design, representation to be effective in another culture and locale. Let's look at a few examples that were listed by Jenko. I'm not sure how many of you all remember seeing this ad. In the early 70s, Pepsi launched an international campaign with the slogan, "Come alive, you're in the Pepsi generation." While this was a huge success in the West, it backfired when the slogan was mistranslated during localization. In Chinese, the line was mistranslated to mean Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead. And in German, it translated to rise from the grave with Pepsi. Yikes. Some common other disasters you may have heard of are Electrolux's Nothing Sucks Like an Electrolux, or KFC's Finger Licking Good, which translated to mean eat your fingers off, or HSBC's Assume Nothing, where HSBC had to spend over $10 million to rebrand their Assume Nothing tagline, which was translated as Do Nothing in most languages. This rebranding gave birth to their slogan, the world's local bank. Very clever, I thought. Today, they use the slogan, Together We Thrive, which represents their new global brand identity. What do you think are some of the common pitfalls you see in these examples? And how then can a brand, product, or service be truly localized? I think it's evident that marketing and localization teams must work more collaboratively for brands to survive and thrive as e commerce dominates consumer purchases. Here are a few great examples listed by Smartling. The WWF site. Now, in order to engage viewers around the world, the WWF has put a lot of effort not just in translating their content, but also serving the right content to the right users. This means while the US version of the site provides a study on the declining monarch butterfly population, their Spanish page has a direct feature on Earth Hour. The WWF is able to provide a more compelling experience with your content that always feels fresh and relevant by highlighting the information that matters most to the readers in a specific region. Take Airbnb, for example. Airbnb is leveraging localization to add in an extra level of personalization to their experience. Perhaps one of the best examples today of a well executed localization strategy is Netflix. This is a classic example of successful globalization and localization strategy. Netflix is able to capture such a vast global audience by allowing users worldwide to view subtitles in a language of their choice or choose a dubbed version of the show or movie. But localization doesn't end there for Netflix. They've even localized the app navigation and UI for different countries. They scale their UI design using a technique called pseudo localization. This accounts for 25 plus languages and scripts. In pseudo localization, the software assigns space for one, two, or more words after the standard English text. This is to account for increase in total characters required for different languages. Here's another interesting example, Nintendo. Nintendo is really unique in the sense that it offers a direct contrast to Netflix. Now, instead of tailoring content for their North American audiences and redesigning parts of their game or removing ideas that might be strange to Western players, Nintendo doubles down. Gaming is an odd market in that the investment of localization must really be worth the return. The resources involved in developing, translating, adapting, and testing games can be very intensive, with the end product not always delivering the experience gamers have come to expect. And that's the real challenge. Providing gamers with an experience they were expecting, especially in contrast to the native release of the game. They don't want to feel like they're playing a watered down version or westernized version of a game, but rather the appeal is in the original or unaltered version. Nintendo has instead developed a process where localization discussions occur as the game is being built and designed. Instead of completely developing the game and then localizing the finished product, Nintendo has a team of localization experts that translate games, create marketing content, film brand videos, and ultimately shepherd the delivery of the games onto the American shores. The idea is that with localization and development happening simultaneously, Nintendo can streamline the process and ensure consistency between both the native and the localized version of the game. Which brings me to what localization really means. Localization is the application of location specific standards to your content. where your content could be digital marketing, could be a website, a product, a service, or anything else. Localization is the adaptation of a product or service to meet the needs of a particular language, culture, or desired population's look and feel. And a successfully localized service or product is one that appears to have been developed in the local culture. I'm sure you'd agree it's useless to simply replicate one content strategy in other regions. Often thought only as a synonym for translation of the user interface or the documentation, localization is far more complex and entails customizations related to text and graphics containing references to objects, actions, or ideas, which in a given culture may be subject to misinterpretation or simply viewed as insensitive. Even the layouts differ. Not all languages read left to right, and a lot more. How then should you approach your localization needs? Now, there are various localization standards and practices for quality assurance that you can follow for your localization needs. However, the question is, are these generic standards sufficient, or do we also need a customized global content strategy? What is a global content strategy? Well, a global content strategy is a framework for creating and managing content that is published in different languages, cultures, and regions, and includes much more than content planning or phased calendars. A global content strategy includes everything from governance and content journeys to workflows and performance matrices. If you're looking to localize your content in an effective manner, here are a few tips for creating an effective global strategy. Preparation. Before you begin creating a global content strategy, it is important to have a clear and concise goal. Begin by consulting with people who will be part of this global implementation. Way too often, localization tasks are looked upon in a piecemeal manner where the content journeys are disjointed. The different teams work under different schedules, budgets, and also many times use different tools, which can result in misalignment of goals, project delays, and not to forget all the rework that's important or involved. Consult the stakeholders for decisions on governance. It is very important to know where will the content be created, how will it be managed, and who will be maintaining it. Will this be done in a centralized manner? Will this be decentralized? Would a hybrid approach work better? And so on. Once you have answers to these questions, develop and hard code your strategy and draft your key processes, which become your localization cornerstones. Now, based on this, draw up project plans detailing timelines, responsibilities, milestones, and so on. This becomes a starting point for creation of a global content strategy document. We then move to the next stage, which is where we gather information. Now that you have nailed the width of the strategy, it is time to add details and to build the depths of the strategy. Here you need to know who is your target audience and how do they consume content, and then assess if your goals are aligned to their needs. You could use consumer personas for this exercise. Think about Netflix and Nintendo's localization strategy as you work through this step. A good barometer for your goals and strategy is competitor information. What is your competition doing in the said markets? How are consumers responding to them? This becomes an important part of your market research. Once you have all of this information, document it. The next step or the next step is the execution. Now that you've defined the content landscape, it is time to begin work on your strategy and thinking of the most optimum ways to implement it. Now, during this period, you will be faced with the decision between creating a lot of content for a particular market or addressing more markets with less depth. And there is always a trade off. At Lionbridge, we bring marketing and localization budgets together, which helps drive efficiency that can help companies create more content with the same budget. That way, they can work towards targeting more markets with greater depth. At this point, it's useful to develop preferred content journeys so you're clear on how you'd like people to consume and move through your content. You can also start content mapping here. Nail down the types and formats of content you'd like to provide at each stage of the content journey and which part of this content will be localized in which language for which market. By planning this before the writing begins, you'll make the process much easier by ensuring it's optimized for localization. The next step is implementation. Make sure you create a global branding guideline, workflows, and processes to provide guidance on what should be translated, what will mean localization, what does not need to be changed at all. Your workflows should also include efficiencies. For example, you should be able to help decide which content might benefit from automation, such as machine translation, for example. You can create these efficiencies by using an integrated technology stack and streamlining processes. Also, recent development in languages and AI technologies allows company to link content performance with certain language quality indicators such as readability scores or terminology diversity. These matrices help identify content that may perform below expectation. Your team can then fix the content before it goes to the market and is localized. These types of actionable insights at the start of the localization process helps reduce cost and also helps you make informed decision on what content to invest in. The most important part, the ROI. Now, measuring your content's performance is imperative, we all agree. But what and how should you measure? There are a zillion matrices available in the market today, from social shares to click through rates to bounce rates to consumer feedback to change in skill and competency and to direct ROI and much more. So the question still stands, what and how to measure? To ensure you measure the right things for the right reasons, always stick to your localization goals. Create your KPIs around these goals and monitor and measure them, based on which you will need to fine tune your global content strategy as you move along. By following these simple steps diligently and constantly being in touch with your team members and other stakeholders will ensure you have a strong global content strategy and are able to create content that's localization friendly and ready. Let's take a look at how we do things at Lionbridge. As you know, Lionbridge is a leader in localization and digital marketing. We are privileged to work closely with some of the most successful market leaders across industries. From this vantage point, we've observed multiple companies in a variety of verticals embrace the holistic approach to localization. And based on the sum of our experiences, we've developed a generic content life cycle and a set of best practices that any company can use to elevate their localization process. Our 8 step content journey life cycle encapsulates the most important activities across marketing and localization. The marketing component of the content journey comprises of steps 1, 2, and 8, and the localization component of the content journey involves steps 3 to 7. I hope you found these tips helpful. Managing your content journey holistically may seem like a daunting undertaking, but small changes can have a big impact on how your digital marketing strategy results. The ability to reduce rework cost and identify high performing content make it worth your while to implement this approach. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Bye bye.